My name's Alicia Davis. I'm the chair of the, or one of the co-chairs of the Public Health AI Super Group, which is part of the Turing's Clinical AI Special Interest Group, and so linked to the Alan Turing Institute. I'm absolutely delighted to host today's Public Health AI debate, and we have two fantastic speakers with us. We'll be recording this session to share it a later date up on YouTube, and we can provide that link later on to you through the newsletter as well too. This Public Health AI, today's Public Health AI debate has been organised by Rachel Thompson. She's one of the SPRs, Public Health SPRs, and an NHS Clinical AI Fellow up in Scotland at the minute in NHS Education for Scotland. Unfortunately, Rachel couldn't join us this afternoon, so I'm kind of stepping in, but it's really Rachel that's brought today together. So just to say thank you to her. The motion for today's Public Health AI debate series is that the energy consumption associated with AI training and operation is an insurmountable barrier to it contributing positively to public health. So we will be asking you, our audience, to cast your vote shortly, and then again at the end of our debate, after we've heard from both Hugh and Gabby, who I'll introduce in a moment, two fantastic speakers giving their view, and there'll be an opportunity for opening it up to the floor for questions and answers and reflections from yourselves as well too. So to speak for the motion, we're joined today by Professor Hugh Montgomery. So thank you, Hugh, for coming along. He's the chair of intensive care medicine at UCL, and really an expert in clinical research but also the health impacts of climate change. So he's arguing for the motion. And then against the motion, we're joined by Gabrielle Samuel, or Gabby, a lecturer in environmental justice and health at King's College, and co-director of a group called SHADE, which is the Sustainability, Health, AI, Digital Tech and the Environment Research Group. So before we open the floor to our two speakers today, just I'm going to pop the vote in the chat shortly. So AI, enormous potential to transform public health, which we hope to help to bring to the surface through this group as well too. From predicting disease outbreaks, personalised treatments, population health medicine, but it comes at environmental costs as well too, particularly in terms of energy use and emissions. So, but when we talk about AI and climate impact and health, what are the kind of costs that we're really looking at? And are there ways to find that kind of ways that they can be mitigated so that we can still advance population health using AI for that public good? So let's have a think. Let's have a look at what your thoughts are before we get started. So I'm just going to launch this poll. Hopefully you can see it. It's live there. I'll put it up just for about 30 seconds, where you can vote for or against the motion. The mission, I was going to say then, the motion. The energy consumption associated with AI training and operation is an insurmountable barrier to it contributing positively to public health. So we've got a few that have voted there. That's 2022, and I think we've got about 40 in the room with us, 45. So we'll give you a couple of minutes to vote, and then we'll see at the end of listening to Hugh and Gabby how that vote has swung in which direction. Someone had asked, I mentioned that we're recording and we'll put it up on the YouTube channel whenever we have that up and running. And yes, that's all of that at the minute. And whenever you want to ask any questions or reflections, feel free to use the chat to get us started in that direction.
The question really is like, what do we do with the timer with the cake when we want to cut it?
if you're in the audience, would you mind muting yourselves, please, just while we have the speakers talking. So we've got, I'm going to stop that poll there now. So we're at, oh, someone just nipped in at the very end, and I'm going to share the results. So that's pretty 2/3 against the motion, so it won't be an insurmountable barrier, but actually a third for the motion that AI training and operation will be an insurmountable barrier to contributing positively to public health. So it's going to be a really interesting discussion. So to get us started, I'm going to pass to Hugh first. So over to you, Hugh.
Well, thank you for having me. Let me do the, oh, someone else is sharing. It says I need to
stop sharing. There we go.
Okay, lovely job. So I will go to sharing there, and then I will try to open a talk. And with a bit of luck, you hopefully can see that now, can you?
Yes, we can. Excellent. Fantastic.
Well, thank you. And Gabby and I have chatted before. I mean, I could argue either way on this, but I'm now going to convince you that I am totally sold on the premise that we can't do this. And in fact, in honesty, I do think that's probably the case. I want to convince you why. If you shove a large amount of toxin into a small circulating volume, the concentration of that toxin will go up in a circulation and it will kill you. And we're adding a lot of toxin to our planetary circulation. Last year alone, we added 54.6 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent to our atmosphere. That's 54.6 thousand million tons. Each ton is 1,000 kilograms. Each kilogram is 523 liters. That's what we added last year. That's the greenhouse gas, and it traps radiant energy. So it lets shortwave radiation in, it traps longwave radiation. How much? Already a minimum of 8 Hiroshima bombs worth of energy every single second. And that's what this looks like, going on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's driving up temperatures. These are average land surface temperatures now approaching 1.9 Celsius above pre-industrial. It's worse over Europe. We're approaching 2.5 Celsius. It's worse in the Arctic and Antarctic, where temperature rise is 4 times quicker than elsewhere, where we're already punching through, now approaching 3.5, and the Northern Arctic, 5 Celsius above pre-industrial. And remember that even if we stopped adding any greenhouse gases, temperatures will continue to rise because there is a lag. 30% of the heating takes 1,000 years to happen. A lot of the energy we're adding is going into the ocean, and that's around 300 zetajoules of energy a year. How much is that? Last year alone, we added enough to take 1 trillion Olympic swimming pools from freezing point and boil them off. That's what we're adding every single year. The temperatures are rising on land, causing colossal and rapid ice sheet melt. This is the last 1,500 years worth of data. Look what we've done to Arctic sea ice extent in the last 50 years alone. This is land ice melt, cumulative mass of glacial ice, and look what's happening. It's not just falling, it's falling at an exponentially increasing rate. We're adding energy to an atmosphere. If you add energy to an atmosphere, you get weather. If there wasn't any energy in the atmosphere, there'd be no weather. The more energy you add, the more extreme weather will be, and the more extreme weather events you'll get. Let's just look back at last year. Chile ablaze in February. California with 40 million affected by mudslides. Switzerland without snow. Reservoirs in Catalonia and Spain and Portugal running at 16% of their normal volume. And that in the middle of winter. Texas with its second biggest fire ever. Dubai facing 2 years worth of rain in 16 hours, and then it happening again only 2 weeks later. Tens of millions affected by flooding in China in April, tens of thousands dead in India in June, massive storms again hitting Texas in June. By July, 1,500 people dead in the Hajj pilgrimage because temperatures bust through 50 Celsius. Massive storms raging through Europe last summer when we just had a rather soggy one. European landmass was savaged by storms, whilst New Mexico was ablaze. when the Arctic caught fire, when the Amazon in large portions ran dry, when Ecuador was ablaze. And by September, Europe was flooded. So was Florida in September with its first hurricane, followed by a second 2 weeks later. Valencia in November, massive desiccation and drought, followed by a sudden flick in the northern jet stream, dumping rain and killing that many people. And remember this year alone, this satellite image of Los Angeles ablaze from a climate change event, from desiccation of soil, 3 centimeters of rain in a year, and sudden hot winds coming down from the mountains fanning the flames. The melting land ice and thermal expansion of oceans is driving sea level rise, now at an ever-increasing rate, 3 times quicker than in the 1990s, now a centimetre every 2 years. Remember, the last time we breached 420 parts per million, sea levels were 58 metres higher than they are now. And atmospheric CO2 concentration now is 427 parts per million. So we know where we're going with this. We're causing a rapid acceleration in the heating. Methane, a very powerful greenhouse gas, is 83 times as powerful, actually, in its first 20 years as is CO2. And as we heat carbonate rocks, we're releasing methane clathrates, we're melting methane hydrates, we're warming wetlands, which are fermenting to release more methane. The wildfires are releasing carbon monoxide, mopping up hydroxyl radicals, which would normally clear methane, so its atmospheric half-life is extended. And we're burning down trees, the woody surface of which contains a microbiome that would normally strip out methane. So we're extending its half-life, which means the concentrations, which had gone up steeply and plateaued from natural sinks, are now also rising at an exponentially increasing rate. We're also getting positive feedback loops from other reasons. We're melting surface ice, and that on land and water, exposing more dark soil and ocean. So we're losing what's known as the albedo effect of snow and ice reflecting light back into space. That rate of energy gain level has doubled in only the last 14 years. And that's an underestimate, as we know from a paper in Nature last year, because of surface slush. The fires are releasing CO2, and there are fires globally. Those in Canada into summer of 2023 added 6% to global greenhouse gas emissions just on their own. The warming of the oceans evaporates water. Hot air can hold more water. That water vapor itself in high atmosphere is a greenhouse gas. And rainforests have now become net emitters of CO2, as melting or warming tundra as it increases its respiration. I'll flick through that slide briefly, but what it's telling you is that we are changing low cloud cover, also losing an albedo effect. That's added an extra 1.7 watts per square meter of radiative heating, meaning that temperatures are now rapidly accelerating. We're on target, not for 1.5 from Paris, no longer from 4.5, but we're now on target for 10 Celsius this century without action. 3.2 is a global mass extinction event. And along the way, we're seeing binary weather state changes. If you raise Arctic temperatures by 1.7 to 2.3, even transiently, you trigger abrupt and irreversible collapse of the ice sheets, leading to massively raised sea levels. And we're already way past the 1.7 to 2.2, as I pointed out earlier. We're averaging across the Arctic Circle 3.2 and nearer 5 in the high Arctic. The major ocean currents are threatened with immediate collapse. If they don't collapse completely, and a paper in Nature last week suggested they may not collapse completely, they will certainly slow very dramatically with only a couple of decades, with colossal impacts on human civilization, if it could even exist in the Northern Hemisphere. And the economic impacts are huge. We know that we will lose at least 38 trillion a year off a global economy of 110 trillion, and we'll have lost that now within 24 years. And we've been warned. The Institute of Faculty of Actuaries telling us that our economy may not exist at all if we don't mitigate climate change. We've been warned by this paper in Science that we're heading for a permanent level mass extinction in your and my lifetimes. The IPCC telling us that without immediate delay, we miss a brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future, one where you and I might survive. So this requires massive action to stop emissions. And as the world scientists reported in the State of the Climate report last year, We're on the brink of irreversible climate disaster. Much of the fabric of life on Earth is imperiled, and this is a global emergency beyond any doubt. So what we can't be doing is anything other than stopping emitting CO2. We certainly can't be adding new technologies that accelerate emissions. Because even if we thought 1.5 degrees was safe, which it isn't, and even if we thought we could reach it, which we can't, to reach the Paris targets would mean we have to reduce emissions in every single thing we do at work and at home by 15% per year every year. And even that won't be enough for the reasons that I've explained. So we can't have aeroplanes saying, well, we're only 4%, it's not down to us. And agriculture saying, well, we're 38%, but beef farming's a bit different and it's a bit less. And everyone's got a reason why their carbon contribution should be exempt or is so small that it doesn't matter. But we have got huge increases in the number of data centers now. This is looking at the increase in electricity use, and we know that what was reported is not the same as real energy use. This was for Amazon's servers. Microsoft is 21-fold higher. Google is rising by 2.7-fold, and Meta similarly. A huge increase in the number of data centers, a huge increase in the power consumed by them. We're now looking at these data centers responsible for nearly 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And you can see from those graphs, that isn't dropping. We didn't need to add 4% to global greenhouse gas emissions, but we have. And that amount is going up very steeply indeed. And on top of that, we now chuck in AI. This is the time it took to reach 1 million users in years. Some of them you could see not very long, some of them a lot longer. Netflix took 3.5 years to reach 1 million users. Airbnb took 2.5 years. ChatGPT took 5 days and Threads took an hour. And if you look to the right there at the CO2 emissions for each activity, you can see this massive increase, first in ChatGPT going up to 30 million within the space of only a month. But look to the right there at the difference in the CO2 emissions for each search or each use. It's a dramatic increase. It's a 2.5-fold rise, but at the same time as the users went from 0 to nearly 30 million in such a very short space of time. ChatGPT uses 15 times as much energy for one action as Google does. And a single image search, for instance, in DALL-E in 2022, which was introduced in 2022, was a 2-gram CO2 cost per search for a single image. And you can see here, if you look at Adobe Firefly, a standing start of 0 to 24 million uses per day at a very substantial energy cost as well. This is the costs in watt hours for 1,000 tasks to be performed. And this was a paper published only in Nature on Monday of this week, showing again that AI in terms of image generation or image capturing or image answering, these AI things have quite a substantial cost. And Microsoft's emissions are therefore rising steeply, not just because people are using more Microsoft, but very, very, very largely driven by the use of AI, up 29% their emissions, and Google's emissions for similar reasons, up 48%. Remember, we're meant to be dropping emissions by 15% per year. How is this in any way compatible with doing that when our lives depend on it happening? This paper, again from Nature yesterday or Monday, we're looking at imaging data centers against a rising backdrop of energy use, accounting for very substantial amounts of power consumption and of greenhouse gas emissions, with that rising very steeply on a rising background of energy use. This is the sort of tonnage of CO2 that we're looking at increasing in only the next 4.5 years as a result of AI use. Healthcare may be even worse because we use very large data sets to train and very large data sets to deploy. The algorithms themselves are very complex and they need frequent updating of the models. So the carbon costs of training and deploying an AI in healthcare is enormous. And I speak as someone, it wasn't mentioned at the beginning, I don't have a conflict of interest, and I did work for Google DeepMind on AI in healthcare for 5 years. All of this said, the CO2 costs are relatively small. An MR scan just in using power from conventional grid structure in the UK requires 14.6 kilograms of CO2 to be emitted, and the current AI analysis tool will be 0.5 gram. So one might say that in the great scale of the technologies into which these areas are being deployed, it's a relatively small increment. But it remains the case that across the whole suite of medical applications, we haven't even really started with that deployment. That deployment is going to go up. The training is going to be very expensive in terms of emissions, and so is the deployment. And I remind you that we have to have this at least 50% reduction, and probably a great deal more, within 57 months. Not only if life's going to remain comfortable, but if we are going to survive. And by that, I include myself, I'm 62, and my remaining son, who's 19 years old. So I'm going to stop at that point. I'm not a nihilist or a Luddite about new technology, but I'm a realist. We have to, if you and I are going to live, we have to have ceased all emissions and be drawing down at scale within 9.5 years. And what we can't do is exempt the technologies that we like from that equation. We have to address it everything, everywhere, all at once. And the AI is only one part of that. So that's where I'm going to stop. And I'm going to hand over for a contrary view, which I'll probably believe as well. Thank you.
That's wonderful, Hugh. Wow, you put a really compelling case forward, I think, in the for the motion. Yeah, just gives you really good food for thought. So, Gabby, it's over to you now to think about, well, can we overcome those issues to usefully use AI for public health gain in this space? So, over to you.
Great, thanks so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can see you and hear you.
Fab. My Wi-Fi is playing up, so if I go crazy with blurriness, do let me know. So thanks, Hugh, for your introduction, which was very interesting, and I'm now going to counter it. I'm not going to argue that AI doesn't have a very high energy consumption, but I will argue that this is not insurmountable. I just want to make a disclaimer that this is very hard because my research critically explores the environmental harms associated with the AI from an ethical and sociological perspective. And I spend most of my time highlighting these concerns and concerns around kind of like the driving energy and resource consumption of AI. But I'm going to convince you somehow that actually it is not an insurmountable barrier. And just to even start by doing that, I would just want to say that I think that the proposition is redundant. I think that AI is already contributing positively to public health, and therefore we already have that under our belt. So a range of examples include COVID-19 pandemic. AI models were used to predict infection hotspots, optimize vaccine distribution, and accelerate drug discovery. In another example, AI-based drones are already being used to deliver essential medicines to remote areas during climate disruptions. Here's an example of the zip line in Rwanda, but there's also last mile delivery in Nigeria and villager reaches drones for health in Mozambique. Climate and environment-informed data analytics that uses AI is already forecasting health threats and trends. So this is from University of Berkeley, who has created an algorithm to predict climate-affected wildfire spread to improve early warning systems and health policy planning in response to, Hugh's discussion about the wildfires. And then more importantly, or maybe equally importantly, AI is actually also reducing energy consumption in other sectors. And this then frees up energy use in those sectors and therefore decreases overall global energy use, which means that there's more energy to go around. Now, we can look at the health sector as one example. So AI is improving efficiencies in the operation of healthcare systems. So this is an example from Peng et al. About a digital twin technology that's being used in Shanghai Hospital in China, where to monitor electricity and water consumption, they looked at past trends in consumption. And then when predicted consumption was out of the normal range, the changes were flagged and they managed to reduce energy consumption in the hospital. Remote monitoring of outpatients is another example. So this not only reduces transport-associated energy use and therefore has a direct energy saving, but in some instances it has led to less hospital trips through the earlier detection of clinically relevant symptoms, which means less need for intensive healthcare intervention. And intensive healthcare intervention is where most of the energy of healthcare comes into play. And this has been shown in pilot trials for example, for heart conditions and also post-surgical care. So overall, the fact that AI is already bringing public health benefit means that even if the status quo remains, my argument has been met. But let's suppose that AI has the potential to bring even more public benefit in the future. If we imagine this, is the energy consumption associated with AI still an insurmountable barrier to contributing positively to public health? I would say no, and I want to make 3 points. The first one's quite long, so you're going to have to stick with me on it. So the first is that there's been a huge spotlight placed on the energy associated with the digital sector. And there are likely a whole range of reasons for this, but I'm just going to pull out 2, so you kind of get where I'm coming from. So the first is a surprise element. I didn't think that there was some physicality associated with the digital, because the metaphors used to describe the sector are things like the virtual and the streaming and the cloud. And that's a very good news story, right? That's something journalists can pick up on and to sell newspapers. The other one is the big bag tech discourse, right? Big tech is so evil and so powerful, and they're doing all this bad stuff in the world. And now let's add to that the environment. So there's a very good hook for a news story. So we can see how there's lots of reasons why there may be a spotlight on these issues in terms of the environmental impacts of AI. But then there's other issues as well. So the lack of transparency around the energy use of AI in the sector, and the fact that the energy use calculations associated with the digital sector often are widely different, and this can cause a certain panic, right? Because if you have uncertainty. And there are many reasons why we have this uncertainty. So one is that modeling often relates to old technologies, meaning that calculations are quickly obsolete in a matter of months or even years. But the figures are still being used in scholarly documents and policy documents. Another reason is that there are many different methodologies to calculate energy consumption, and these can be complex, prediction-based, and have a range of uncertainties. And one of the issues here is around boundaries. So we've seen this in the digital sector, where people measuring the environmental impacts of the digital sector use different boundaries for what they include and what they don't include. So are you including carbon emissions associated with chip development or not, type of thing. The final reason is because accounting scientists have very specific discipline knowledge, and they're produced in siloed communities, but they need data from other knowledge communities or epistemic communities. And what they do is they have a lack of relevant understanding of the data produced from these other communities, but they use that data. So they're bringing in data without understanding the assumptions that are within this data, and this leads to inappropriate use of knowledge and resultant knowledge claims. Now, these difficulties with calculating have profound societal implications in terms of how we come to see the issue. So in 2019, this is a fab example, right? The international news media covered a non-profit organization's report, Lean ICT Towards Digital Sobriety, which emphasized that spending 10 minutes watching a high-definition video by streaming on a smartphone is equivalent to using a 2,000 wattage electric oven at full power for 5 minutes. International news media coverage this report with more or less sensationalist headlines, including "Chill your Netflix habit," climate experts say, and "Streaming's dirty secret, how viewing Netflix top 10 creates vast quantities of CO2. However, stakeholders and researchers within the field of carbon counting have since discredited the methodology used within the report, pointing to a glossing over of uncertainties, incorrect and missing data, and contention in the field about the appropriate methodological research analysis. So where I've got to so far is to say that while there is a spotlight on this sector in the public and media discourse, this spotlight tells us these doom and gloom scenarios. But there's a whole right range of reasons why these scenarios may be exaggerated. So we actually need to go and look at the numbers more carefully. Now, this is exactly what Hannah Ricci does, who's a quantitative researcher at the University of Oxford. So she's investigated and concluded that actually the problem might not be as bad as we think. So we need to, of course, take her calculations with a pinch of salt, because obviously I've just explained to you many of the issues with calculations, but they do tell a very, very different story. So drawing on others' work, so this is a very recent piece of work from De Vries, who estimated through a life cycle assessment that if every Google search became a large language model search, the company's annual electricity demand would increase from 18 to 29 terawatt hours. Now, there are, the author says, massive difficulties in doing the calculations, but overly, they suggest that while this is not insignificant, okay, it's also not that huge and not a massive issue. I mean, it's an issue, but not a huge issue. And she also points to the recent International Energy Agency annual electricity report, which was published in January this year, which estimated that data centers, AIs, and cryptocurrencies consume just under 2% of global electricity demand. And we heard that Hugh pulled out the number 3.7%, but that number is a very, very high estimate through only some of the publications that have been published, and that most estimates say that actually it's around 2%. Now, while these figures are pre-Gen AI in 2022, it still suggests quite a low proportion of energy. And then if we look at where data centers fit into global electricity demand, we can see that they're quite low in relation to other industries. And then even if we look at whether there's a fast growth in data centers or slowest growth, they still come out very low. And this is remembering, right, that data centers are holding up digital technologies, and digital technologies are reducing electricity demands in other sectors. So I think that's really important to remember. Now, obviously, some countries fare worse off than others, right? So Ireland has a very large amount of data centers, and so their electricity consumption from data centers is much higher. And also in some US states, this is the case as well. And in fact, the spatial concentration of energy demand is extremely high for data centers, much higher than for other facilities, which is one of the reasons why there's a likely mismatch in the concerns of tech companies at the local level and the numbers on the global scale. And this, of course, raises a whole range of environmental justice issues, which I suppose most of my research looks at, but is not relevant here. The conclusion here is that while AI may be in the spotlight, this doesn't always mean we should listen to the figures, and calculations around AI energy use suggest it is less than an exaggerated claims make out it to be, at least on the global scale, potentially not on the local scale. So this means that energy is not going to be an insurmountable barrier. Second, the AI industry is actively working to reduce energy consumption through energy efficiency processes and optimized algorithms. Between 2010 and 2018, compute increased by more than 550%, yet energy use in data centers increased by just 6%. And Hugh talked about this 50% increase in AI, but we have to remember that it's 50% of maybe only 2%, so that the increase is not that much. And now it's important to remember that efficiency gains do not necessarily lead to a decrease in energy use, because as efficiency gains come into play, users' behaviors change. And that's called the rebound effect, right? So if you, in an ordinary example, if traffic is inefficient, such as this diagram, you can build more roads to make traffic more efficient. But if you don't control the behavior of buying cars, you end up with just more cars on the road. However, while this rebound effect is happening, and most of my research focuses on it, digital technologies are simultaneously reducing energy consumption in other sectors. So overall, this means it is unlikely that energy consumption will lead to an insurmountable barrier to AI use, as there will always be energy available. This is also because of the increase in renewable energies. And then on top of this, we're having technological solutions which are hoping to address the energy consumption. For example, programming AI to run during renewable energy and low energy times. And in fact, the big tech are really, because they are in the spotlight about this, driving huge amounts of energy and funding into addressing these issues, meaning that these technological solutions are likely to be sooner rather than later. And in the same vein, for good or bad, in my view bad, but it's happening anyway, we have a global and geopolitical AI arms race predicated on a pro-innovation, pro-growth capitalist obsession that views ever-increasing consumption as a desirable way to show off geopolitical strength and gain world domination and power. So huge amounts of resources have been invested in AI, in HICs and NMICs, with a trajectory of AI underpinned by massive R&D alongside business incentives and market logics, governance and policy making, and broader social and cultural norms of neoliberal ideologies. So just as I said before, one aspect of this investment is to scale AI. And to scale AI, we're going to need it to be more efficient, and we're going to need it to use less energy. So we're going to need to find a technological solution. And that's the premise of Moore's law. If we invest enough, it's not going to be a problem. I'm not saying this is good. I'm just saying this is likely what's going to happen. So in conclusion, my second point is that we will improve the energy efficiency of AI, and that cycle will continue with rebound effects, but we are unlikely to reach a point where we run out of energy. So finally, where does the health sector sit in this? Well, it is, as Hugh said, we're using a vast amounts of data, and it is the fastest growing sector in the data sphere, albeit one of the smallest at the moment. But AI is still, for public health, is still a very small fraction of the amount of energy compared to other AI in sectors. And as I said, governments are investing heavily in many other sectors, and public health researchers still use low energy AI algorithms. Now, that might not be the case at the Turing Institute, but if you globally, from all the researchers I've spoken to, they're still using off-the-shelf AI algorithms. So while the health sector will increase AI considerably in the coming years, it is likely to come close to whatever AI is being used for in other sectors and where the forefront of the innovation is occurring. And furthermore, my research suggests that when talking to health researchers using AI in the UK, energy was not an issue. It was the data interoperability and access that were the key barriers that needed to be addressed. Now, obviously, this will be different in different countries and settings that may have more or less energy, but most data centers at the moment are in the global north, so it's likely that cost rather than energy will present the barrier in those countries. So in conclusion, I've made 3 points as to why energy consumption is a legitimate concern, but it's not an insurmountable barrier to bring public health benefits. It doesn't use much overall global energy. Health-related work uses even less, and technological innovations will be addressed much through the issue of the socio-political investment in this area. Now, that's not to say that this is right or morally good, but it's to say that it is not an insurmountable barrier. And we have to look at the facts if we're looking at this debate. So I'm going to end there. And I just wanted to finish up by just making a few comments. So firstly, because this is the typical me as an ethicist, I didn't bring up regulation because I don't think regulation is going to happen. I have a very cynical view on that. If we're thinking about energy consumption, we do need to think about our carbon tunnel vision and other environmental impacts. And whilst energy is not an insurmountable barrier, it doesn't mean that it's not an issue in relation to equity and justice. So I will end there, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic, Gabby. That was a tour de force for the other side of the argument. If we can, if you'd like to come back. And if people have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. There was a comment earlier on from Mansour that AI potentially could make the situation a lot worse if not managed appropriately by looking at lower energy consuming AI solutions. So while if I can ask one question, one question that I was thinking was, are there innovations, Gabby, you pointed to one where AI was being used to look at in the digital twins in the hospital sectors or in that kind of provision of services in areas where maybe it's challenging to get access to. But are there innovations in AI development that could help to reduce that carbon footprint in health itself without then sacrificing kind of the impact on climate and population health? So if we think about within our own sector, those other innovations might be.
I think there are loads of innovations around operations. Supply chains is a really good example. A huge amount of waste. We've done focus groups with members of the UK public around their views on environmental impacts in the NHS. Waste was one of their key issues that they flagged, and it's something that the NHS focuses on. There's a huge amount of waste. So helping with supply chains is one aspect of this. And bringing efficiencies into managing beds and so forth. All AI is coming in everywhere around in terms of operational aspects to reduce the emissions associated with healthcare in particular. My concern, ignore this if you're going to vote for my side of the debate, because clearly I'm right, but my concern is that in very often with digital technologies, we bring them in and put them on top of what we have now. So instead of replacing, right, we're just adding. And I think that's a real concern that needs to be addressed. And we need to address this by not seeing AI as a solution to all problems, but using it in a very careful way. I keep flagging all these things that come from my research, but still my debate, side stands.
Really important point. Thanks, Gabby. Hugh, you had your hand up, and then I'll come to Ruhan.
Yes, well, thank you. And of course, Gabby and I, we know this is a sort of rather false argument. So, but I think they're helpful to generate the ideas. And I think we probably agree on pretty much everything. My concern as a healthcare practitioner in my sort of daily life is that unfortunately introducing these efficiencies only drives up emissions for the reasons that we've discussed or were discussed by Gabby, the Jevons paradox one. So if you look in South London, for instance, the use of AI to change aircon and HVACs in theatres and so forth, saving millions of pounds, because we've got more people that want more treatment for more disease, all that does is get displaced into a new technology like a new MRI machine that actually uses more CO2. And every single thing I've ever done to reduce emissions in the health service has increased emissions until I worked out that all I was doing was saving money that could be spent somewhere else. I pick up, she's right, it's somewhere between 2 and 4%. Let's say it's 2. But again, my problem lies here that it's going up. So we say, well, use of data has gone up by 50%, but data emissions have only gone up by 6%. But they have gone up by 6%. And if we keep using more, which we will, it's not a static baseline, those emissions will continue to rise. This is the big problem. And they have to be at zero. And every single organization or group would say the same thing. So airlines would claim, and it's not strictly true actually, that if you just look at the CO2 production, they're 2.4% of emissions. So they say, well, we're only 2.4%. And then data say, well, we're only 2%. And everyone says, well, we're only X%. Health services overall are only 5%. So everyone's got a reason for not doing something. And this is really, I guess, my one plea from this. If I'm really honest, do I want to have a particular go at AI? No, I don't. But the point I'd like to make is that we can't keep giving exemptions to every single thing that we do, because we have to be down to zero, completely zero. AI cannot make any emissions at all, none of them at all in 9 years from now. And that applies to everything else too. The question for me is, how is AI and say, well, actually going to achieve that in the same way that an airline should? Anyway, I'll shut up now. But I think Gabby's points were really well made, actually, I have to say as well. So thank you, Gabby.
Wonderful. Thanks, Hugh. Gabby, do you want to come back on that point?
I was going just to say that I don't think it'll be hard zero emissions still means that we can use renewable energies, although they're not net zero anyway. But I think that the point here, and I'm sure Hugh will agree with me, is not that we should not be using AI, but we should be very careful about how we use AI. And we shouldn't see AI as a solution, but we should go out into society, see what the values are in society, what we need, and then develop solutions to address those values, which may or may not be AI, depending on what the issue is, and then only use AI where it is used in that way. And in which case, if we do that, then to me, that's quite sustainable in the sense that it's only being used where it's needed and that there'll be enough energy to use that. Hence, of course,
just to pick up on that, of course, it's not a question, is there enough energy? There'll always be enough energy. We can always add another thing. The question is, have we got enough planet to cope with the energy gain? That's the problem. It's not the energy production, it's the energy gain. That's but there you are. Anyway, I'm sure others have got lots of questions.
Wonderful. Thanks, Gabby. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name right, so please forgive me. Is it Raidra?
It's Rory. It's close enough.
Rory. Rory.
Scottish,
Go on ahead, Rory, and welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Gabby, and thank you very much, Hugh, for the debate. Super interesting. My question is about some of the difficulties that we as researchers might have in actually quantifying the energy costs of these AI solutions. Because it's all very well and good us saying, oh, we'd like to use an AI solution, we'd like to measure the impact, but if we can't actually measure it accurately, it's very difficult to make improvements or informed judgments on it. And so I wonder if you had opinions on tools that we can use for these as sort of first thing. And then kind of related to that, I know a lot of AI solutions nowadays use essentially proprietary models and will fine tune them or customize them for a particular application. And as I understand it, it's these companies don't currently release data on sort of what the inference cost is of that. So it's making it very hard for us as researchers to quantify how much energy it's actually taking.
Gabby, do you want to go first on that one?
I will. I'm happy to go. So there are tools out there. Oh my God, a Loix tool. Oh God, I can't remember what Loix tool is called, but I can drop the link in, which is specifically designed to you can download them. Now I'm not a tech scientist, so now I'm talking naively, but you can download it onto it and you can measure the environmental impacts associated with the AI tool that you're running. There are also, I don't know if you've heard of the LEAF accreditation system for labs, which is an accreditation system, bronze, silver, gold, to show how environmentally sustainable your lab is, and it's specifically for wet labs. And they have just developed one for dry labs as well, and that provides like a lot of information about how you can make your lab more sustainable. It has carbon accounting tools and so forth, so I'm happy to share that link with you to help you get you started. The other point, so I can share all of that if that is useful to you. The other point that I want to raise is that personally, I would argue that we need to be careful about how much responsibility we place on researchers. Okay, so climate change is a sociopolitical issue. I'm a sociologist, so I'm going to say that anyway, right? And so from all the research that I've done, researchers really struggle, such as yourself. Like, you want to do the right thing, but you don't know what the right thing is to do, and you have no guidance, and you have many other pressures, like getting your best AI out to get your publication, to improve your career, competition and all the rest of it. And it's really, really hard. And so I think I use a term response able, which is from Haraway, Donna Haraway, who talks about if you don't have the ability to respond, you can only put so much pressure on yourself. So then the question is what can you do? So you can do simple things, but I think advocacy and awareness from a researcher will probably go a lot further than trying to really think about reducing your emissions, because I think that needs to kind of happen at the data center level, at your institutional level, right? I had a lot of researchers say, I can't control which data center I store my data in because I'm not allowed to. So they can't choose a data center that is using solar energy, that has a low water efficiency and emission efficiency and biodiversity efficiency. They can't do that. They're tied. So it's about getting advocacy to your institution to make sure that your institution, or asking questions of the private companies that don't ever respond, but still asking the questions is important, to raise awareness. So I think, to me, that's what would be the best thing that any researcher can do.
Fantastic. Thanks, Gabby. They're really, really nice points that people can take away and kind of action as well too. So actionable things. Hugh.
Yes, I'm going to agree with Gabby on that. The fossil fuel industry was very good at making individuals feel that it was their fault. This idea of a personal carbon footprint actually came from the fossil fuel industry, because they don't want to be taking the blame, in the same way that the food industry has told fat people they're fat because they're lazy and stupid and don't take enough exercise and eat the wrong food. It's a way of abrogating their responsibility for what they're inflicting on the populace. So I totally agree with Gabby that the way forward is to make sure universities switch to 100% renewable power, for instance, and then work and pressure on industry to say, we don't want your product unless it is the most efficient there is. And, being fair to some organizations like Google, they've got power purchase agreements across Europe where all of their power comes largely from wind, actually. And of course, Microsoft have opened up the nuclear power station in the States, which of course is potentially a good thing in terms of reducing power. So I think we can provide that leverage. In terms of how you measure it, I totally agree with Gabby's point earlier on. This is a really wicked problem. And if you talk to Mike Berners-Lee, who is probably the best carbon footprinter in the world, he says it's at the moment near enough impossible. You've got to work out the mining of the sand that gets melted at very high temperature, make the silicon that then has to get shipped to make a chip in a very, very sterile environment. It takes 5 years to even build a plant that can make a chip, let alone the air filtration that does it. Then the rare earth metals have got to be mined, smelted, refined, installed. The movement of those, the installation into, as the CPUs, into the larger computer installations. Then you've got the air conditioning to maintain the temperature, etc., etc. Trying to work out what all that means is near enough impossible. So I think Gabby's right when she said it in her talk as well. It's very hard. And I'm not an expert in this at all, but there are indeed, as Gabby says, tools that you can install software on your own computer. So when you run a search, it interrogates what chip is being used and where to run that search, or for instance, or that calculation. Then we'll come back saying, well, the power specifically related to what you've just done, not to the back end, is X. So you can get a feed on what you've just done, but that takes us back to Gabby's first point, which is we need to go to the root cause of this, which is where the energy is coming from and who's driving the pollution related to it, rather than beating ourselves up necessarily for the fact we did one AI related task.
Lovely. Thanks, Hugh. Just one last question, and then I'm going to give you a minute to sum up, and then we'll put the vote back up again. There's a couple of people asked in the chat about that kind of a point you raised, Gabby, nearly about that kind of carbon tunnel view. So, what about the other environmental impacts, and a reflection on the impact of clean drinkable water impact, and any views on the impact of AI on that aspect. I assume that's from the cooling and those different components. But do either of you have a view on that one?
Do you want to go first?
Go, Gabby.
Because I've gone first with everything else, so I'm going to let you go first.
No, you go. It's great.
So data centers are increasingly thinking about their water consumption. It's like the latest spotlight. Let's look at water consumption. And also biodiversity and various other indexes. But coming back to my point about locality is really key here. And this is the bit that often gets hidden. So we in the global north are focusing on carbon emissions because this is what we're doing at the moment in the global north. We feel that we need to get, climate change under control. We need to get our emissions under control. But if, for example, you look at, say, some countries in South America, particularly, for example, Chile, then they don't need, their emissions aren't so problematic. They have more renewable, other countries have more renewable energy, and other environmental impacts are way more important. So, for example, for them, it's mining. So most of the mining for the digital technologies happens in Chile. That's where and here you have a whole range of environmental justice issues that are emerging because of the mining industry and what that causes towards their populations. So yes, the carbon tunnel vision, all my research a lot looks at, is that we need to get past this tunnel vision and this obsession with only focusing on the energy associated with AI, because I think we could probably get that under control. But what everybody's ignoring is the global, the political context within which AI sits, which is the mining of these minerals, these rare minerals, the manufacturing of them. And then also, which I also look at quite a lot, is the e-waste. So the huge amounts of electronic waste that is being produced as we constantly upgrade our devices, because we need the most efficient devices to ensure that our emissions maintain very low. So to get our emissions low, we have to buy new devices. Our software doesn't work on the old devices, et cetera, et cetera. So then we're chucking away our computers, and only 20% of electronic waste is recycled formally globally, which means 80% is illegal black market dumped in various countries, normally in low and middle income countries. And I could talk at length about that, but I'll stop now and pass on to Hugh.
That'd be for another day.
Yeah.
So in brief, yes, of course, the phrase polycrisis is there. 72% of vertebrate life on this planet has disappeared since I was aged 8. We're losing 8 species an hour to extinction. It's 10,000 times faster than any mass extinction we've ever seen. And within 20 years, at the current rate, since we're just punching through RCP 8.5, we're going to have triggered a Permian level mass extinction on top of that, which means there won't be any life left on Earth, and 96% will be gone in the lifetime of my 19-year-old. In other words, he won't have that life. So these are all part of a pattern of rapacious destruction of our environment for the process of advancement, in inverted commas. And my only point really about this, because it is a false dichotomy, is that we cannot continue in this way across any of what we're doing. The whole suite has to change radically or stop, because if it doesn't, we will stop. That's what not being sustainable means. So my only plea out of this is let's not exempt anything in what we're doing, because this has to apply to what we eat, how we heat our homes, the clothes we buy, but it also applies to AI and technology.
Lovely, thank you, Hugh. On that note, I'm going to launch the poll again and see how votes have maybe shifted or not for those that are still with us. While people are filling in the having the vote, then just a little reminder that actually in a couple of weeks, I'll find the link and I'll pop it up in a minute. The clinical AI group, we have a meeting on the 25th as well, if you're free, talk where we'll be joined by Malt from the Health Foundation to talk about the government's new AI plan for the future, and to hear about that and the impact on health and the health system more broadly. So we'll pop that link up in a minute. Oh my goodness, I think there's actually been a shift, unless, because we've got 42 and about the same number of people as before. So at the start we had, I've lost the figures now.
I feel like I might have argued against myself quite a lot in the discussion.
I probably did the same. I wouldn't worry, Gabby.
Okay, I'm going to end the poll. Of course, this maybe wouldn't hold up to scientific scrutiny, but would you believe it? The 4 has won it. So it moved from, it was 36% for the motion and 64 against, and now it's swapped the other way around. So really fascinating. What a fascinating discussion. Thank you ever so much, Gabby and Hugh, for taking two sides of a coin, which are very, very difficult actually to put yourselves in. But I thought you argued both directions really wonderfully, and it led to a really nice discussion as well too. So thanks ever so much. Thanks again to Rachel, who organised it, but sadly couldn't join us this afternoon. Yeah. And we hope to meet some of you again soon. Another public health AI debate series. We'll get a little series up and running with some other themes as well. So Lassie, very many thanks, and enjoy your afternoon.